I was asked to put together an article for Rocky Mountain MRA on some of the unique ways that men experience the world, and I got a bit of time. I'm waiting for a colleague at LAX airport, so I thought, rather than typing it out, I'd put together a video explaining, one of my life stories with a view that hopefully, people get a bit more of an understanding of things. Now, when I moved to the United States, and I've been living in the US now for about 7 years, one of the questions people often ask is, what brought you to the United States? And, the simple answer is, I had business dealings here and I moved here for business. But I think what a more interesting question to ask is, what did you leave behind in Australia? And why did you feel, comfortable? Or what sort of drove you away from your family and friends? And that's a story which I think is worth sharing. Now, just before we decided to move to the United States, my son Oscar was 6. He was in the first year of school, kindergarten, and my eldest son Declan was 3. He's 3 years older, so he would have been in the 3rd grade. And my wife had gone to Europe for a wedding. She was away for 2 weeks, and I was looking after my 3 kids and also working, during the day. So I was looking after my customers during the day and my kids at night. So I got through the 2 weeks, no incidents. Everyone had their 5 fingers or their 10 fingers and 8 fingers and thumbs left. Everything had been fine, and I was actually quite proud of myself that I got through it all. My wife was coming home the next day, and I went to pick my kids up for the last day. It was a Friday. Anyway, when you pick the kids up, when the school bell rang, the mothers used to like to hang around and have a bit of a gossip. So, often, you were expected to hang around, or your kids expected you to hang around for about 30 minutes after the bell rang, where they'd run around like crazy people and, play on the monkey bars and, just kind of, enjoy the fact that they'd been let out of school. And normally my 2 boys would play with the same group of friends, but on this particular day, they wanted to play with different groups of friends, and that was the first time that they'd ever asked that. And to be honest, I felt a bit. I didn't really like the sounds of that. I felt a bit uneasy that I couldn't watch both of my kids at the same time. But other people did it, and I thought, look, even though the school, anyone could come and go, and anything could happen. Just relax, let your kids do it. So I was kind of alternating between Oscar and Declan. I'd watch Oscar for a minute or two, and then I'd watch Declan for a minute or two. And then after a few iterations of that, I looked over to Oscar and he'd gone. I couldn't see him. And, I thought at first, he's just amongst the crowd. I can't see him. And as the playground started to thin, I realised that he wasn't there. So I started running around, I checked in the toilets, and by this stage the playground's starting to, there's tumbleweeds, there's no everyone's gone. And, Declan and I were running around, we're looking in the toilets, we're looking in the school hall, and in the school hall there's all sorts of open doors, there's, a storeroom full of chairs that could come crashing down on anyone. Really sloppy stuff, and the thing that goes through your mind is the next door you're going to go through, you're going to find your kid crying with his pants down. And, that just really plays on your mind. And then when you don't find him, it's even worse, because you think, well, where is he? In Australia, we don't have this concept of Amber Alert. So if a kid goes missing, they either pop up or they don't. And sometimes they don't turn up. So you reach this point where you think, okay, there's no point in looking anymore. He's gone. You've basically given up. So I was heading back to the office to ask that the police be called, and I stumble upon Oscar. And I said, look, where have you been? He says, someone took me. And I went, who took you? And he pointed over to a woman. He says, that woman took me. And I thought at that point, when you start I could have gone over to the woman and said, look, why did you take my child? And no matter how calm I was, and at this point, I was pretty shaken. No matter how calm I was, you never know what people are going to say, right? So I just thought, look, really, rather than risk going over and, this conversation getting out of hand and, me being judged as a man, at 6'2", standing over some woman who's crying poor. I went to the office and I asked that the police be called. Now, the police came, while we were waiting for the police to come, and they took a good 10 or 15 minutes. They weren't rushing. It wasn't an emergency call. I was standing there waiting for the police with my two boys, and I was shaking, and no one came over. No one came over and asked me if I was okay. But a whole group of women were they were literally peeping around corners. They wanted to see what happened. But they were more interested in seeing what happened than they were doing the decent thing and coming over and asking me if I was okay and consoling me. And I was shaking, but you can't see shaking. You can see crying. If it was a woman would have been in tears, she would have been screaming, and she would have got a huge amount of attention. But as a male, I didn't get any of that attention. I don't even think men, they can't cry in Kew. No matter how emotional you are, it just doesn't come naturally. So, I was getting no empathy. And when the police the police came, they spoke briefly to me, and then they went and spoke to the principal and the woman, and they came back and explained to me what had happened. That this woman, she worked for the after-school program, and she heard she was new, and she'd heard Oscar's name being called by one of his friends, and had mistakenly believed my Oscar was this autistic kid called Oscar. And in fact, I think the autistic kid's name wasn't even Oscar, but she was confused. So she grabs Oscar, my Oscar, and says, "You need to come with me." And Oscar goes, "Well, my dad's just over there." And she goes, "No, your dad's not here. You need to come with me." So, Oscar's probably wondering what's going on. And anyway, she took him to the after-school program building, and she went to admit him and check him in. And the woman who does the check-in went, "Who's this?" And she goes, "This is autistic Oscar." And they go, No, this isn't one of our kids." So they then threw my son, my 6-year-old son, who was confused, out of that room like he was trash. They didn't take him to the office. They just let him go and find me again. Well, obviously, I wasn't around. He was confused. He thought I wasn't even there. So he went to the office and said, "My dad's not here. I don't know what to do." And the people from the office said, "Just go to the after-school program," which were the same people who just booted him out and said he didn't want there. So they didn't want him there. So he was confused. He just wandered around the playground. He could have gone out on the street and been run over. He could have gone to a stranger to seek help and been abducted. It was just really, really sloppy stuff. Now, this was explained to me. I didn't ask to press charges. At least I knew what had happened. And I went home, and my wife came back the next day, and I explained to her what had happened. Anyway, over the next couple of weeks, we're starting to detect that, whenever we ask people, can we have, your kids over, or can our kids come over and have a play date at your house? There's always some excuse, that both our two sons weren't being invited, and they were regularly invited for play dates, and that just stopped. And even my daughter, she wasn't invited anywhere anymore. So my wife finally reached out to these people and said, is there something going on? What's going on? Now, it was explained to them that there was a concern amongst all the mothers that if anything went wrong when my children were over there, that I would call the police. Now, these people just didn't seem to understand that there's a very different situation when you voluntarily send your kids over to someone's house and something goes wrong. You go over there and, you're friends. You can talk about what happened. But when a stranger abducts your child and you don't know what's gone on, and, as a man, you just don't feel able to go over and confront that person and ask what had happened, because you'll be, if the wheels come off, you could end up, with an accusation against you. These women just didn't seem to really understand the challenges that I faced. And really, instead of them coming over and helping me, they sat there in the shadows and gossiped amongst themselves and judged me harshly for what I had to do. And really, if the same thing happened again, I'd deal with it exactly the same way. That, you, as a male, you just don't want to put yourself in that situation where you become irrational. Because if you become irrational or are perceived to be irrational, that's when the police come with the tasers. Whereas a woman who's doing that, it's just accepted. Okay, well, she must be upset for a good reason. And then when it's explained that her child had been abducted, oh, well, that completely explains it. But I just didn't feel that I would be judged in that way. And in the end, the way that I dealt with it, basically made us pariahs amongst the people who our children hung out with. And really, you know, when the time came, the opportunity came to move to the United States, it was a no-brainer.